The archive chamber stretched into darkness, filled with data crystals that glowed like captured starlight. Zixarel moved between the towering shelves, his forearms carefully sorting through centuries of forgotten records. Most archivists avoided this section, the precursor wing. They called it, though few believed the precursors had ever truly existed. To most citizens of the Confederation of Civilized Worlds, they were myths, stories told to children, cautionary tales about species that reached too far too fast. Zixarel knew better. His compound eyes focused on a data fragment he had recovered from a derelict station in the Orion Spur. The crystal was old, damaged, its information corrupted by time and radiation. Yet something within it called to him with urgent whispers across the centuries. Still chasing ghosts, Zix? The voice belonged to Cora, a fellow archivist from the Kethra species. Her telepathic tendrils flickered with amusement as she floated past, her crystalline body refracting the archive's dim light. Not ghosts, Zixarel replied, his mandibles clicking with determination. Evidence. Cora's mental projection conveyed skepticism. She had heard this before, had watched Zixarel spend years pursuing fragments of the species called humans, the supposed precursors who had vanished 800 years ago, according to the fragmentary records. Humans had once controlled a vast sphere of space. They had colonized hundreds of worlds, built stations that defied physics, created wonders that modern science could barely comprehend then. Suddenly, silence. No distress calls, no war. No plague, just empty stations, abandoned colonies, and a void where a thriving civilization had once existed. The younger species had moved in, claimed the worlds, built their own civilizations on the bones of whatever had come before. What did you find this time? Cora asked, her curiosity finally overcoming her skepticism. Zixarel placed the crystal into the reader. Holographic displays erupted around them, showing star charts, ship designs, and fragments of text in the angular human script that took decades to partially decode. This was recovered from the outer marker station at Threshold Point, he explained, his voice trembling with excitement. It's a military log, I think, from the final days before they vanished. The log was incomplete, corrupted, but certain phrases emerged from the digital noise. Final evacuation. Project Exodus. No time to warn the others, and most chilling of all, they won't understand until it's too late. Too late for what? Cora wondered aloud, her telepathic presence probing the data with delicate mental tucheshiks. Arl had no answer. That was the mystery that had consumed his life's work. What had humanity known that drove them to abandon everything? The official Confederation position was clear. Humans had been a primitive, warlike species that destroyed themselves through some catastrophic war or ecological collapse. The fact that no bodies, no weapons, no evidence of destruction had ever been found was explained away as thoroughness, the final sanitization of a dying culture. But Zixarel had found too many inconsistencies. The human stations, though abandoned, showed no signs of panic or destruction. They had been methodically shut down, systems powered off in proper sequence, data cores wiped clean. This wasn't extinction. It was evacuation. More troubling were the references to the vigil and holding the line, scattered through recovered logs. Holding what line? Against what threat? You should publish this, Cora suggested, though her tone carried doubt. Bring it to the council. Zixarel's wings buzzed with frustration. He had tried, years ago, presenting his findings to the Vryn Historical Council. They had dismissed him, classified his research as speculative mythology, and suggested he focus on more productive scholarly pursuits. The truth was that nobody wanted to know. The galaxy had moved on, built new civilizations, new alliances, new certainties. The idea that the precursors might have had good reasons for vanishing, might have known something the modern species didn't, was too unsettling to contemplate. "Maybe I will," Zixarel said quietly, knowing he wouldn't. Knowing that this obsession had already cost him professional respect and career advancement, he returned to his work, cross-referencing the new data with previous finds, building a picture that would never be complete. Somewhere in the fragments, he sensed a story of sacrifice, of impossible choices made by a species facing something beyond comprehension in his private quarters that night. Zixarel stood before a wall covered in star charts, string connecting points of data like a conspiracy theorist's nightmare. Red marks indicated abandoned human colonies, blue showed derelict stations, and green marked the mysterious threshold points locations on the galaxy's rim where human activity had been most concentrated before the vanishing a pattern existed there. He was certain, though its meaning eluded him. The threshold points formed a rough sphere around the galaxy, as if humanity had been watching something, guarding against something that approached from the intergalactic void. His communicator chimed a priority alert from the Confederation Deep Space Monitoring Network. Zixarel almost ignored it, but something made him accept the transmission. The face of a Tormuk station commander appeared, his craggy features pale with something that looked like fear. "This is Commander Breckthur of Listening Post 17, the Tormuk said, his normally steady voice shaking. "We've detected an anomaly. Hyperspace signature emerging at point threshold 7. Coordinates matching old human navigation markers." Zixarel's hearts began to pound. "What kind of signature?" "Unknown," Breckthur replied, "but it matches fragmentary data from the precursor database. We've never seen anything like it. The energy readings are causing our sensors to malfunction." On the view screen behind the commander, Zixarel could see the anomaly appear in space itself. Bleeding light that existed in colors the living eye shouldn't perceive. Something was coming through something massive. "I'm sending you the transponder data we managed to decode before our systems crashed," Breckthur continued, his hands working controls off-screen. "You're the only one who might be able to translate it." The file arrived. Zixarel's hands trembled as he opened it, running the ancient human script through his translation matrices. The results made his breath catch in his throat. UESS Remembrance, a human ship, after 800 years of silence. After centuries of absence, something that claimed to be human was returning, and as Zixarel watched the real-time feed from the monitoring station, as he saw the massive vessel emerge fully from hyperspace larger than anything in the modern Confederation fleet, its hull marked with battle scars that seemed to predate known history, he realized that everything was about to change. The ghosts he had chased for so long were no longer ghosts. They were coming home. The emergency council session convened within hours of the detection. Representatives from 50 major species gathering in the Grand Chamber on Sanctuary Prime. Holographic displays showed the impossible vessel traveling through Confederation space at speeds that defied known physics. It's ignoring all hailing frequencies, Admiral Vex of the Kether Defense Fleet reported, her telepathic voice carrying undertones of deep unease. "We've broadcast on every known channel. Every historical human frequency we have on record, nothing but silence." High Counselor Vorn, a massive Tormuk whose species controlled much of the military infrastructure, slammed his fist on the council table. "Then we disable it. This vessel is traveling through sovereign Confederation space without authorization, heading directly toward the core worlds. Disable it with what?" Commander Selavis of the Science Directorate asked, her avian features ruffled with agitation. "Our scans can barely detect it. The ship phases in and out of normal space, exists partially in dimensions our sensors can't even measure." Zixarel sat in the observation gallery, invited as the Confederation's only expert on human technology, though he felt woefully inadequate. Everything he knew about humans came from fragments and guesswork. Archaeological ruins and corrupted data. He had never expected to see an actual human vessel. Certainly not one that seemed built with technology centuries beyond anything in the historical record. Perhaps we should consider that this might not be hostile, Cora suggested from beside him, her telepathic presence calm despite the panic swirling through the chamber. 800 years ago, humans vanished. Now one of their ships returns. Maybe they have an explanation. Or maybe they're coming back to reclaim what was theirs, Zixarel murmured, voicing the fear he could feel emanating from the gathered counselors. Every world they once controlled is now inhabited by our species. Earth itself is home to 4 billion Vrin. The debate raged for hours, splitting along predictable lines. The military factions wanted immediate action. The diplomatic corps urged patience. And the scientific community simply wanted to study this impossible artifact in the end. Action was taken the Tormuk War Sphere Unbreakable Mandate. Pride of the Confederation fleet was dispatched to intercept the Phantom vessel. Its mission: disable the intruder's engines using electromagnetic pulse weapons. Force it to stop, establish communications cycle, watch the engagement through real-time feeds. His heart sinking as he saw the massive war sphere approach the human vessel. The Unbreakable Mandate was a mobile fortress, 3 kilometers across, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Against it, the human ship, though large, seemed fragile, ancient, a relic from a bygone age. This is War Sphere Unbreakable Mandate to unidentified vessel, Commander Brechther transmitted, his voice carrying the full authority of Confederation military might. You have entered sovereign space without authorization. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded, or we will disable you by force. The human ship continued on its path, unchanging, unhurried. Final warning, Brechther announced. Disable your drives now or we will fire. Silence was the only response the war sphere's weapons charged, energy readings spiking across every sensor. Zixarel wanted to shout, to warn them that they didn't understand what they were facing. But his voice was lost in the tension gripping the council chamber. The electromagnetic pulse erupted from the Unbreakable Mandate in a wave of invisible energy. Enough power to shut down every system on a dozen ships simultaneously. It washed over the human vessel like water over stone. The Phantom ship didn't slow, didn't alter course, didn't even seem to notice. It simply continued its journey toward the galactic core, phasing through normal space like reality itself couldn't quite hold it. Impossible, Brechther whispered, his voice carrying across the open channel. Nothing should be able to withstand that. And then the human ship responded, not with weapons, not with aggression, but with a transmission that broadcast on every frequency simultaneously, translating itself in real time into hundreds of languages. Every tongue spoken by every species in the Confederation. The voice was human unmistakably. Human, a woman's voice carrying weight that spoke of centuries and burdens beyond measure. This is the Eis, remembrance to all inhabitants of the Milky Way galaxy. The transmission began, and something in that voice made Zixarel's blood run cold. We are aware our return is unexpected. We are aware you have built new civilizations on the worlds we once called home. We are aware you have forgotten we existed. The council chamber fell into absolute silence. We do not come to reclaim. We do not come to conquer. We come to warn. The voice continued, each word precise, deliberate, heavy with meaning. 800 years ago, we detected a threat approaching this galaxy from the intergalactic void entities we called the Voidborn. Reality-devouring horrors that consume all matter, all energy, all life. Holographic displays throughout Confederation space flickered as the transmission carried data, sensor readings, images of things that shouldn't exist, cosmic nightmares, tearing through the fabric of space itself. We calculated their arrival. We knew the younger species would not survive. Knew you were not ready to face what was coming. the transmission explained. So humanity made a choice. Zixarel felt tears forming in his eyes as understanding crashed over him like a wave. We evacuated our entire civilization to the intergalactic void. We met the Voidborn at the threshold of the galaxy, and we have been fighting them for 800 years. Every battle, every sacrifice, every life lost, all to buy you time to grow, to develop, to become strong enough to defend yourselves. The images that accompanied the transmission were beyond horror: human ships burning in the void, battles fought in impossible geometries, soldiers in advanced armor holding defensive lines against entities that dissolved reality itself. We have held the line, the voice said. And now emotion cracked through that iron discipline. Grief and exhaustion and an unbreakable determination. We have bled for centuries to protect a galaxy that doesn't remember our names. But our vigil is ending. The vanguard of the Voidborn fleet has broken. Through our defensive perimeter, the final image appeared on every screen across. Confederation space, a fleet of impossible size, of ships that looked like they had been grown rather than built, approaching from the darkness between galaxies. They will reach the galactic rim in 50 years. The main fleet will follow within a century. The transmission continued. We are coming home to deliver this warning, to prepare our worlds for what's coming, and to ask the children we protected to stand with us in the final battle. The transmission ended with coordinates, with data, with invasion timelines and defensive strategies compiled over 8 centuries of warfare, with one final message that would echo through history. Humanity remembers. We never forgot the home we left behind. We never stopped fighting to protect it. We are the remembrance, and we are coming home in the council chamber. Chaos erupted, some species calling it a hoax, others demanding immediate military mobilization, still others falling into religious fervor at the idea of ancient guardians, returning with warnings of apocalypse. But Zixarel simply sat, staring at the data scrolling across his personal display, seeing centuries of his research validated in the most terrible way possible. They hadn't abandoned the galaxy. They had saved it, and now they were asking for help to finish what they'd started. The UESS Remembrance continued its journey toward Earth, and in its wake, the galaxy tore itself apart with debate. Zixarel found himself suddenly elevated from dismissed eccentric to crucial expert, called upon to decipher the flood of data the human ship had transmitted. The data was staggering in its completeness. 800 years of warfare documented in meticulous detail. Battle reports filed with military precision, even as humanity fought nightmares at the edge of reality. Cora worked beside him, her telepathic abilities uniquely suited to organizing the massive influx of information, though she had to pause frequently, overwhelmed by the psychic echoes contained within the data. Centuries of sacrifice compressed into digital form. They launched Project Exodus in phases. Zixarel explained to the Emergency Research Committee. Holographic displays showing the evacuation timeline. First, they moved their military fleet beyond the galactic rim, establishing defensive positions at what they called threshold points. The committee members, representatives from a dozen species, watched in silence as the data revealed the scope of the operation. Then came the civilian evacuation. Every human, billions of them, loaded onto generation ships, arc vessels, experimental craft that pushed the boundaries of their technology. He continued, pulling up manifest after manifest. They left nothing behind except empty stations and sealed data cores programmed to wipe themselves after a set period. Why not warn us? Admiral Vex demanded, her crystalline form pulsing with agitation. Why not tell the other species what was coming? Cora answered, her telepathic voice heavy with the emotional weight she had gleaned from the records. Because they calculated that none of you would survive long enough to matter. The Kethera were still in their pre-industrial age. The Vryn were barely exploring their own solar system. The Tormu could just achieve nuclear fission. She pulled up probability models, human calculations that were 8 centuries old but painfully accurate. Humanity ran millions of simulations. In every scenario where they tried to uplift the younger species quickly enough to fight, those species were destroyed by the accelerated development. They tore themselves apart with weapons they weren't ready to wield. The truth settled over the committee like a shroud. Humanity had chosen isolation and sacrifice over forcing unprepared species into an unwinnable war, so they went alone. Zixarel said quietly. They took everything they had and went to meet the Voidborn at the threshold. The battle logs revealed what that meant. The first contact with Voidborn entities had occurred 60 years into the vigil. Near a dwarf galaxy humanity had designated Outpost Alpha. The descriptions defied comprehension. Beings that existed partially outside normal physics, that consumed matter and energy not for sustenance, but for the simple fact of their existence. That turned stars into expanding voids of nothing. Humanity had lost 70% of their fleet in that first engagement. They learned. Commander Selenis noted, her scientific mind latching onto the tactical evolution documented in the logs. Each battle, they adapted, developed new weapons, new strategies. The technology progression was astounding. Within 200 years, humanity had developed causality weapons that could erase Voidborn entities from past and present simultaneously. Dimensional anchors that could pin reality-phasing horrors into normal space. And ship designs that incorporated technologies the Confederation's best scientists could barely theorize. They paid for every advancement in blood, Cora whispered, sharing what she had gleaned from the psychic impressions embedded in the data. Generations born in space, raised to fight an enemy they had never seen threaten their ancestral home. Dying in the void to protect people who would never know their names. One log stood out among the others. Dated 400 years into the vigil, a personal journal from a Captain Marcus Chun, commander of the destroyer Eternal Sentinel. His words painted a picture of life during the Long War. Children born on warships who knew Earth only from historical files. Families who marked holidays according to ancient calendars while drifting in the void between galaxies. Soldiers who volunteered for suicide missions because they believed in a home they would never see. Today we lost the Prometheus and all hands. Chun had written. 2,000 souls who sang old Earth songs as they rammed a Voidborn hive ship, giving us the opening we needed to collapse the incursion point. I should feel victory, but I only feel tired. The entry continued, revealing the psychological toll of the endless vigil. My daughter asked me why we fight for people who don't know we exist. I told her about duty, about sacrifice, about protecting the future, even when the future has forgotten your past. She's only 8 years old, and already she understands that she'd probably die in this war. It ended with a line that would become emblematic of humanity's 800-year struggle. We are the remembrance. They may forget, but we never will. The research committee sat in stunned silence as Zixarel presented the full scope of the revelation. Humanity hadn't fled from danger. They had run toward it, had spent 8 centuries as the galaxy's unknown guardians, fighting horrors that would have exterminated every other species before they'd achieved spaceflight. The current transmission indicates the Voidborn vanguard has broken through their defensive perimeter. Zixarel concluded, humanity is returning not because they've won, but because the battle is coming here. What do they want from us? High Counselor Vorn asked. His usual belligerence tempered by the weight of what they had learned, Zixarel pulled up the final section of the transmitted Data, humanity's strategic assessment of current Confederation military capabilities, their proposed joint defensive plans, their technology-sharing protocols. They want allies, he said simply. They've been fighting alone for 800 years. Now they're asking the species they protected to stand beside them and face what's coming. The debate that followed was fierce. Some species refused to believe any of it, claiming it was an elaborate invasion scenario. Humanity manipulating them with fabricated data and manufactured threats. Others, particularly those whose home systems had once been human colonies, felt a mixture of guilt and resentment. Guilt for having benefited from humanity's sacrifice unknowingly. Resentment that their entire civilization existed because ancient guardians had deemed them too weak to save themselves. Religious movements exploded across Confederation space, some proclaiming humans as divine protectors, others calling them demons bringing apocalypse. Still others arguing that this was a test from higher powers, but slowly, reluctantly, evidence began to mount. Deep space monitoring stations confirmed anomalies at the galactic rim, energy signatures that matched the void-born descriptions. Scientific expeditions to the threshold points found battle debris, wreckage from ships and entities that defied analysis, and the UESS Remembrance continued its approach, broadcasting updates on the void-born Vanguard's position, sharing tactical data, offering cooperation, even as many Confederation worlds prepared their defenses against humanity, rather than the threat humanity warned of. Xrel watched it all unfold from his archive chamber, the place where he had spent years chasing ghosts who turned out to be the galaxy's most devoted protectors. "What do we do?" Cora asked him one evening. Her telepathic presence weighted with uncertainty. He looked at the star charts on his wall, at the red marks indicating abandoned human worlds now teeming with new civilizations, at the blue marks showing defensive positions humanity had maintained in secret for centuries. "We decide whether to grow up," he said quietly. "Humanity bought us 800 years to develop, to mature, to become strong enough to defend ourselves. Now we get to prove whether their sacrifice meant anything." The choice facing the Confederation was stark and unavoidable. Trust the ghosts who had guarded them unknowingly for centuries, or face annihilation alone when the Voidborn arrived in the end. It wouldn't be politics or military strategy that decided the galaxy's fate. It would be the simple question of whether the children could stand with the Guardians who had never stopped watching over them. The UESS Remembrance entered Earth's orbital space 3 weeks after its initial detection, and the sight of it hanging above humanity's ancestral home sent shockwaves through both Confederation and Vryn colonial authorities. The ship was enormous, dwarfing even the largest Confederation vessels, its hull scarred with battle damage that spoke of encounters beyond imagination, craters that seemed to fold into impossible geometries, armor plating that shimmered between states of matter, weapon systems that defied categorization below. On the planet humans had once called home and the Vryn now called Terra Prime, 4 billion colonists watched the skies with a mixture of fear and wonder. Xrel stood in the primary diplomatic chamber on the orbital station Unity, surrounded by representatives from 50 species who had gathered for humanity's first official contact. Cora floated beside him, her telepathic senses extended, monitoring the emotional currents of the assembled delegates. "They're requesting permission to send a diplomatic shuttle," Admiral X announced, her voice tight with tension, carrying their commanding officer and a small delegation. High Councilor Vorn shifted his massive frame. Suspicious despite the evidence they had reviewed. "Security protocols in place," Dex confirmed, "though I doubt our weapons would be effective against their technology if they intended hostility." The shuttle that emerged from the Remembrance was sleek and compact, its design incorporating principles that made Confederation engineers weep with professional envy. It docked with mechanical precision, and the airlock cycled open. Admiral Keisha Okonkwo stepped through, and Xrel felt his breath catch. She was human in the basic sense, bipedal, bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes, but there was something more to her. Something that spoke of genetic adaptation to centuries in deep space. Her eyes held depths that suggested enhanced perception, Her movements carried a grace that hinted at augmented physiology. Behind her came 6 others, each showing similar subtle modifications, each wearing uniforms that seemed to shift and flow like living metal. "I am Admiral Keisha Okonkwo, commander of the UESS Remembrance and ranking officer of the Human Expeditionary Fleet," she said, her voice carrying the same weight as the transmission they had received. "On behalf of humanity, I thank you for receiving us." The formal introductions followed, species representatives identifying themselves with varying degrees of warmth or suspicion. Okonkwo met each with calm dignity, though Zixarel noticed her eyes lingering on the Vrin delegate, on the being whose species now inhabited her ancestral world. "You claim to have been fighting for 800 years, Councillor Vorn stated bluntly, his military pragmatism cutting through diplomatic niceties. "You claim to have protected us from a threat we've never seen. How do we know any of this is true?" Okonkwo's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, not anger, but a weariness so profound it seemed to age her before their eyes. "You don't," she admitted. "You have only our word, our data, our ships scarred by battles fought in your name, though you never knew we existed," she gestured. And holographic displays erupted throughout the chamber, showing real-time feeds from the galactic rim sensor data, visual recordings, tactical assessments. "But the Voidborn Vanguard doesn't care whether you believe," she continued, her voice steady despite the horror shown in the displays. "They will arrive in 47 years, give or take 18 months. The main fleet will follow approximately 80 years after that." The images showed entities that defied description, masses of anti-reality that consumed everything they touched. Ships grown from corrupted physics, beings that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. "We've spent 8 centuries learning to fight them," Okonkwo explained, "developing weapons that can harm entities that shouldn't exist, tactics that work against enemies that don't follow natural laws." She pulled up battle footage human ships engaging Voidborn constructs in combat that looked more like ritualized, reality-bending than conventional warfare. Weapons that erase targets from causality, armor that phase between dimensions. Soldiers who move through impossible angles of space core gasped, her telepathic senses recoiling from the psychic impressions contained in the footage. She could feel the minds of the human warriors, the cold discipline required to face such horrors, the depth of training needed to fight while sanity itself tried to flee. "We're not asking you to believe us on faith," Okonkwo continued. "We're offering to share everything, our technology, our tactics, our hard-won knowledge. We're proposing a joint defensive initiative, combining Confederation resources with human experience. And if we refuse?" Someone asked from the assembly. Okonkwo's expression hardened. "Then we'll fight alone, as we have for 800 years. We'll position our fleet at the threshold points, establish defensive lines, and do everything in our power to stop the Voidborn Vanguard before it reaches inhabited space." She paused, letting that sink in. "But we'll fail. Our fleet is a fraction of what it once was. We've lost entire generations to this war, sacrificed ship after ship to hold the line. Without support, without allies. We can delay the Voidborn, but we cannot stop them." The chamber erupted in arguments, some demanding immediate alliance, others insisting on verification. Still others arguing that humanity's return itself was the threat they should prepare against. Zixarel found himself standing, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Admiral Okonkwo, you were born in space, correct? You've never seen Earth except through observation?" She turned to him, and he saw confirmation in her eyes. "I was born on the generation ship Perseverance, 240 years into the vigil. My grandparents knew people who had walked on Earth's surface, but that world is as distant to me as ancient history is to you." "Then why?" Zixarel asked, the question that had haunted him since the Remembrance's first transmission. Why fight for 800 years to protect a home you've never known? To save species who forgot you existed? Okonkwo smiled, and it was a sad, beautiful expression, because someone had to. Because we saw what was coming and had the ability to do something about it. Because duty and honor don't require witnesses or thanks. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of species. My daughter is serving on the Destroyer Covenant right now, patrolling the outer defensive perimeter. She's 17 years old, and she knows there's a 90% chance she'll die in combat before her 25th birthday. Her voice remained steady despite the weight of those words. When she asked me why we fight, why we sacrifice, I told her what my mother told me, and her mother before her. We fight because it's right. Because someone must stand against the darkness. Because every generation that grows up free and safe in this galaxy justifies every drop of blood we've shed. Cora suddenly gasped, a telepathic presence surging as she made direct contact with Okonkwo's mind. Something the Admiral allowed with deliberate permission. What the Cathura saw nearly broke her. 800 years of genetic memory. Cultural knowledge passed from parent to child. The weight of an entire civilization's sacrifice compressed into individual consciousness. She saw Okonkwo's daughter, saw the young woman's face as she volunteered for dangerous patrols. Saw the pride and terror in a mother's heart. She saw the fallen names, carved into memorial walls that stretched for kilometers inside human ships. Entire generations who had died fighting monsters at the edge of reality. Soldiers who sang old Earth songs as they made final charges into void-born formations, and underlying it all, an unbreakable thread of hope. The belief that somehow, against all probability, their sacrifice would matter. Cora withdrew from the contact, tears flowing freely down her crystalline form. "They're telling the truth," she announced, a telepathic voice broadcasting to every mind in the chamber. "Everything they've said, everything they've sacrificed, it's all true." She turned to the assembled delegates, sharing what she had experienced, letting them feel the edges of humanity's 800-year vigil. "They are not conquerors. They are not invaders," Cora declared. "They are guardians who never stopped watching over us. Parents who protected children who never knew their names." The chamber fell silent, the weight of revelation crushing down on delegates who had spent their lives building civilizations on worlds humanity had abandoned to protect them. Admiral Okonkwo stood at the center of it all. A woman born in the void who had never known the comfort of a homeworld, who carried the hopes and sacrifices of countless generations on her shoulders. "So I'll ask again," she said quietly. "Will you stand with us when the Voidborn arrive? Will you help us finish what we started 8 centuries ago?" The vote that followed would determine the galaxy's fate. The vote took 3 days of debate, negotiation, and soul-searching that split the Confederation along fault lines no one had anticipated. In the end, 27 species pledged their support to the Joint Defensive Initiative. 18 remained neutral, and 5 actively opposed any cooperation with humanity. It was enough. Admiral Okonkwo immediately began coordinating the defensive preparations, sharing technology and tactical knowledge that would have taken the Confederation centuries to develop independently. Human engineers worked alongside Tormuk shipwrights. Cathara telepaths trained with human psionic specialists. Vrin manufacturers retooled their facilities to produce weapons designed to kill entities that shouldn't. Existixerol found himself appointed as primary liaison between human and Confederation forces, a role that kept him constantly traveling between Earth orbit and the growing defensive installations at the Galactic Rim. The humans had established a massive staging area at Threshold Point 7, and when Zixarel first saw it, he understood the true scale of what humanity had been doing for 8 centuries. The human expeditionary fleet stretched across thousands of cubic kilometers, not just military vessels, but generation ships, mobile foundries, hospital ships, civilian transports. This wasn't an invasion force. It was an entire civilization that had been living in the void. We lost our manufacturing worlds when we evacuated, Okonkwo explained as she gave him a tour of the remembrance. So we learned to build everything in space. Every ship is a factory. Every station is a shipyard. Every habitat is a school training the next generation of soldiers and engineers. Children ran through the corridors, human children who had never known planetary gravity, who studied mathematics by calculating firing solutions and learned history through the lens of an 800-year War I young girl, maybe 10 years old, showed Zixarel her project with pride, a scale model of the defensive network humanity had maintained at the galaxy's edge, complete with tactical annotations and enemy movement predictions. My mom says when I'm older, I can serve on a destroyer, she said brightly. Unaware of the profound sadness Zixarel felt hearing such innocence speak of such horror, defensive preparations intensified as months turned into years. The Confederation fleet integrated human technology slowly. Carefully, weapons that manipulated causality required operators with specific mental conditioning. Dimensional anchors needed crews trained to think in geometries that defied normal. Physics Cora became instrumental in the training, her telepathic abilities allowing her to bridge the gap between human experience and Confederation understanding. She spent weeks in deep mental contact with human veterans, learning not just tactics but the psychological frameworks required to fight enemies that could drive unprepared minds to madness. 47 years after the Remembrance's arrival, sensors at the galactic rim detected the Voidborn Vanguard, the fleet that emerged from the intergalactic void, made stars dim with its passage ships, the size of moons, entities that existed as mathematical impossibilities, swarms of corrupted matter that consumed everything. In their path, the Bastion Line, humanity's defensive network at the galaxy's edge, became the staging ground for the first combined Confederation human fleet action in history. Zixarel watched from the command center aboard the Remembrance as the two forces prepared to engage. The combined fleet numbered over 3,000 vessels, representing the largest military deployment in Confederation history. But against the Voidborn Vanguard, they seemed almost insignificant, all ships. This is Admiral Okonkwo, her voice broadcast across every vessel in the fleet. Human and Confederation alike, 800 years ago, humanity stood alone against this enemy. Today, for the first time, we stand together. The battle began with long-range bombardment, human causality weapons erasing Voidborn entities from multiple timelines simultaneously. Confederation mass drivers launching projectiles at relativistic speeds. The Voidborn responded by simply existing forward, consuming space itself as they advanced. Confederation wings. Implement defensive pattern Delta, Okonkwo commanded, her tactical display showing the battlefield in dimensions Zixarel's mind struggled to comprehend. Human heavy cruisers prepare dimensional anchors. The human ships moved with eerie coordination, decades of shared combat experience allowing them to function as a single organism. They deployed anchors that pinned reality into stable configurations, creating zones where the Voidborn couldn't phase through. Normal Space Confederation ships exploited these zones, pouring fire into trapped entities with everything they had. But the cost was immediate and terrible. Tormuk Dreadnought Iron Mountain took a direct hit from a Voidborn weapon that didn't just destroy the ship, it erased it from causality, retroactively removing it from ever having existed. Zixarel watched in horror as the vessel simply ceased to be, its entire crew gone as if they had never launched. UESS Covenant moving to intercept, a calm voice reported, and Zixarel recognized it. Okonkwo's daughter, commanding the destroyer her mother had mentioned all those years ago. The Covenant was severely damaged, its hull breached in a dozen places. but it positioned itself between the void-born entity and a cluster of Confederation frigates, all Confederation vessels. "Evacuate the sector," the younger Okonkwo commanded, her voice carrying the same steady resolve as her mother's. "We're initiating core detonation. Negative." "Covenant." Admiral Okonkwo's voice cut through the channel. "Professional despite the personal cost. You have wounded aboard. Execute emergency evacuation procedures." "No time, Admiral," came the response. And Zixarel could hear the sad smile in those words. "Tell Mom I love her. Tell her I understand why we fight." The Covenant phased directly into the void-born entity's core and detonated its reactor, a blast that tore a hole in reality itself, collapsing the entity into a dimensional singularity that consumed both destroyer and horror, in mutual annihilation on the Remembrance's bridge. Admiral Okonkwo's hand gripped her command console hard enough to leave dents in the metal. But her voice remained steady as she continued coordinating the battle. "All wings. The Covenant has cleared the approach vector. Exploit the opening." The battle raged for 18 hours straight, a grinding meat grinder of ships and entities locked in combat across multiple dimensions. Zixarel watched Confederation crews learn in real time how to fight enemies their training had never prepared them for. Watched them adapt and innovate and sacrificed a Kethra cruiser captain, finding his weapons ineffective, rammed his ship directly into a void-born construct. A Vryn fighter squadron used their superior maneuverability to lead entities into overlapping fields of fire. A Tormuk engineering team jury-rigged a dimensional anchor using parts from 3 different damage systems, creating a stable zone large enough to hold an entire void-born formation in normal space for the killing blow. And through it all, the humans fought with the cold efficiency of people who had been doing this for 8 centuries, taking calculated risks, making impossible sacrifices, holding the line with the same determination they had shown for generations. When the last void-born entity finally collapsed into dimensional fragments, the combined fleet was devastated. 40% of the human ships were gone, along with 35% of the Confederation vessels, but they had won. The Vanguard was destroyed in the aftermath. As rescue operations picked through the debris field and medical ships tended to the wounded, Admiral Okonkwo stood on the observation deck of the Remembrance. Looking out at the star, Zixarel found her there, her eyes dry despite the losses. Despite her daughter's sacrifice, "I'm sorry," he said. "Inadequate words for an inadequate situation." "Don't be," Okonkwo replied, her voice quiet but firm. She died doing what she believed in, protecting people she'd never met, defending a future she'd never see. She died like a human. She turned to him, and in her eyes, Zixarel saw the weight of 800 years, the cost of humanity's vigil, the price paid by every generation that had fought in the void. "This was just the Vanguard," she said. "The main fleet is still coming. We have maybe 80 years to prepare for the real war. We'll be ready," Zixarel promised. Speaking for the Confederation species, who had finally learned what humanity had known all along, that some things were worth fighting for. Even when no one would remember your name, Okonkwo smiled, and it was a real smile this time, warm despite the cold of space around them. "Yes," she agreed. "I think you will." The observation deck's viewport showed Earth below the world humanity had left behind 8 centuries ago, the home they had never stopped protecting, the planet that had forgotten them until they returned as ghosts with warnings of apocalypse. But it also showed Confederation ships moving in formation with human vessels, species that had been strangers learning to fight as comrades, a galaxy that had forgotten beginning to remember. For 800 years, we stood alone in the dark, Okonkwo said quietly. We watched over you, fought for you, bled for you, all while you lived and grew and built civilizations on the worlds. We left empty to protect you. She placed her hand against the viewport. as if she could touch the planet below. Now, finally, we're not alone anymore.